Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. I want to talk a little bit more about August 4th before I start talking about August 7th. And if you look at the signs in the heavens for August 4th this year in 2017, you'll see that this time Venus is right at the foot of Gemini. You see it right over here is Venus, and this is Gemini, which means joined together, which is what the word Sphinx means as well. It means binding together, closely together. And you see Venus, a bright morning star, at this time in 2017 on August 4th will be right at the foot of Gemini. The sun will be in Cancer, and Jupiter, of course, is in Virgo. And if you look at Virgo, you can see Jupiter right there. It looks like it's in the belly area of Virgo. And as I was explaining in my last video, if this line depicts crossing from inside the womb to outside of the womb, that doesn't occur until, and I'll just show it to you so you can see exactly when that occurs. I'll just try to do it quickly so you can see how Jupiter moves along. We'll just stop here at the 16th. You can see that it's right in the middle of the line, and then if you keep going to about the 27th is when it looks like it's clearly crossed over the line that would represent the area of the womb. So it clearly comes out of the womb around the 26th or 27th of August. And it's interesting that the moon is actually by her feet at that time as well. Of course, she's not clothed with the sun at that time, but that'll be in September 23rd that the sun will actually be in Virgo. It's near the head of Virgo at this point, but it's still in the constellation Virgo. And then Jupiter will be right here. It's clearly crossed the line at this point, and the moon is by the feet of Virgo. So this very well could be the Revelation 12 sign, but I still contend that the 12 stars are always in Virgo's head. I believe this alignment here is too huge to constitute the crown of Virgo. So I believe the sign began to take place a year ago, but it may be that it will come to fulfillment a year later on the Feast of Trumpets. But again, we don't know the day or the hour. Could be before then, could be after then. I'm not trying to set a date. I'm just trying to explain what I believe all this represents. Okay, so now I want to talk about August 4th. And as you may know, August 4th is the 216th day of the year. So 217th in leap years, but usually it's the 216th day of the year. And it also happens to be Obama's birthday. And you may already know that 6 times 6 times 6 is 216. But what I want to try to explain in this video is that this is not necessarily a bad number. As I said in my last video, there's always a true and a false, a good and an evil. And there's a good aspect to this number that I want to try to explain, as well as an evil aspect. And if you go to Revelation 21, this is where it talks about the measurements of New Jerusalem. And I'll just start over here with verse 15. It says, "And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city and the gates thereof and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs, the length and the breadth, and the height of it were equal. And I just want to show you this image over here. This is an article I had bookmarked some time ago, but in this image over here you can see how the height and the length, the height and the length and the width can all be equal, whether it's a cube or a pyramid. So those are the two shapes, or those are two shapes where all three can be equal. The height, the width, and the length can all be equal, whether it's a pyramid or a cube. Okay, then when you get to verse 17, and it's interesting that this is coming up in verse 17, it says, "And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel." So it's 144 cubits is the measurement of the wall, that is the measure of a man, that is the angel. This is coming up in verse 17, but the wall is first mentioned in verse 14. And I just noticed that because the number 14, I believe, is important, because it's in Revelation 14 where it talks about the 144,000. So you see that here in Revelation 14. It says, "And I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on the Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and the Lamb." So it's talking about the 144,000, which are the first fruits and that are virgins, and this is in Revelation 14:4, 144. And 14 is a multiple of 7. The first time you hear about the 144,000, it's in Revelation 7. It talks about the 144,000 that are sealed from the 12 tribes. Well, first it talks about the 12,000. It breaks it down, that are sealed from each of the 12 tribes, and 12 times 12 is 144, so that's a total of 144,000. And then it talks about it, the great multitude just after that. Says, "And after this I beheld, and lo, great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands." So this is in Revelation 7. The next time it talks about the 144,000, it's in Revelation 14, which is 7 times 2, so that's a multiple of 7. And here you see the 144,000 standing with Jesus in white robes on Mount Zion. And then the next time you see the number 144, where it's talking about New Jerusalem, which is the 144,000, because it's the bride of Christ. And so you see that number mentioned again when it's talking about the measurements of the city of New Jerusalem, and it mentions the wall in verse 14. And then in verse 17 it mentions the measurement of the wall, which is 144 cubits. Now, if you look at the word cubits, you see that the measurement of a cubit is actually the length of from the joint of the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, so it's about 18 inches. So it's basically 1.5 feet. Okay, so when you go to the calculator and you do 1.5 times 144 cubits, that's 216, which is the same as 6 times 6 times 6. And then when you get to Revelation 21:17, where it says he measured the wall 144 cubits according to the measure of a man. And of course, the number 6 represents man because man was created on the 6th day. And so when you convert this to feet, you find out that it's 216 feet. And 216 is 6 times 6 times 6. And it's interesting that this comes up in verse 17. And then when you get back to Genesis 49:10, it was in verse 17 where it has this verse, which I believe represents the mark of the beast, and I may try to explain that. I'm not sure if I'll explain it in this video, but it says over here, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. And so it's talking about a serpent bite over here. And if you look at images for serpent bite, you'll see this image over here, and I just enlarged it a little bit, but you can see that this is a representation of the mark of the beast. And when you get back to the prophecy, you see that it says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. And I believe the horse's heels is referring to this image over here when Christ comes back in Revelation 19:11. I believe that's when Genesis 3:14 through 15 will be fulfilled. And over here in verse 15 it says, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. I know a lot of people believe this happened at the time of the cross, and I do believe it happened at that time in part, but I believe this will be completely fulfilled when the Lord returns and he sets foot on the Mount of Olives. I believe that's when the Antichrist will be destroyed on the mountains of Israel. You can see that in Isaiah 14 verse 25, where it says that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off of them, and his burden depart from off of their shoulders. And it's also in Ezekiel 39 where it says, thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, thou and all thy bands, and the people that is with thee, and I will give thee unto the ravenous birds of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. But when you go back to Isaiah 14, you see that once the Antichrist is destroyed, he is then cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch. So once God destroys the Antichrist, and this happens at the same time that Lucifer is cast down, that the Antichrist is also destroyed, but then he's cast out like an abominable branch out of the grave by God, but the whole world is going to look narrowly upon him. And this word narrowly means in wonder and amazement, because they're going to think that he resurrected, but it was actually God himself casting him out of the grave. And it's interesting that it's in verse 17 where it says the world is as a wilderness, and it's in verse 17 in Genesis 49 where it talks about the rise of the Antichrist and the mark of the beast. And I'm about out of time, so I'll have to continue with more in the next video. Thank you.